Mythology is one of the favorite topics in our community. Folks love to hear stories of deity creation stories, stories of rising from the ashes, and sometimes the comedy in mythology is pretty darn good too. And we're talking about that in today's podcast episode.
We know that you were born magical. We know that you are intuitive, and we know that you are brimming with everyday enchantment. Here at the Sisters Enchanted, we believe in intention, we believe in intuition, and we believe in everyday magic. Welcome in to the Expedition to Soul podcast.
Hello, Kelly. How are you?
I'm good. How are you?
I am hanging in there. I'm joined today by the always lovely Kelly Sroka. Kelly is the teacher with me in like pretty much all things TSC these days. Kelly teaches in Holistic Witchery, and Kelly and I are talking mythology today. So, Kelly, we just wrapped our Halloween classathon, which you largely put together and was centered on mythology, the myth of Persephone.
Yes, it was great. I'd always enjoyed the myth of Persephone and that story and how that a lot of it was very focused on her mother. And I mean, of course, that's, the point of it is Demeter taking away all of the abundance in the earth and to explain how things died and needed to be reborn. But we often don't look at Persephone's story or her part, her role in that, and just being able to look at that, to tell it again for us in how we are living today as modern people, modern witches, and stepping into our own sovereignty and being able to make choices and using those cycles and using those parts of us that are so important and that sometimes just get mangled in everyday life, and just stepping into that Persephone power and making choices. It was a great topic to spend a whole weekend on. And so it was a great time.
Yeah, and it's the perfect time of year for Persephone's story. And I know, because you've been in our community for ever and always, that there's always different stories that align with the different seasons, right? There's different pantheons, different characters, different deity that are interesting to lean into. And you've been with us for our class that centers on Norse mythology, which is really fun to dive into as it gets colder out, because the Norse myths are their tales from Northern Europe, where it is cold and it is dark and the winter days are uncertain and dreary. We have these Norse myths of people like Odin and Loki and Thor and Freya. Uh, so as it gets darker out, now sort of we've talked about Persephone, and I think it's time to start uncovering those Norse myths. So Kelly, what is your, we were talking about this before, like your favorite Norse mythology character or story, or just one you'd like, maybe it doesn't have to be your favorite, but a little bit that you love to explore or read about again this time of year.
I do love the story of Odin and how he sacrificed his eye to find the runes, how he hung himself from the tree, um, and just so that he could bring knowledge and bring perspective and bring what he knew that his people needed, and that he was willing to pay a price for it, and he was willing to make a trade and to do something that was very selfless for the people that he was caring for. And so I've always liked that story, and especially when I started learning about the runes, because I didn't it was not until I took Viking magic or Norse magic the first time that I really learned about the runes and learned how important they are and how they have come through for so many years, and we still study them and we still get so much meaning from them. and the fact that Odin was smart enough, I guess, back then to give us the runes and to have this as a place of learning and a place of divination and a place of uncovering personal and community growth and wealth and abundance through the runes. So that's definitely, I always loved that story of Odin.
Yeah. I love Norse mythology because I think that it is a pantheon that has been adopted into the Marvel universe for sure, like the Loki, Thor movies, uh, and TV shows and whatnot now. But really, these Norse myths and these stories are wild. I mean, all mythology is wild. Like we talked about with the story of Persephone, how Zeus, really just just said, "Oh yeah, Persephone can go live with Hades in the underworld," with giving her no agency, like totally taking away her voice in the matter. And we see these themes that are really quite repulsive throughout mythology. And it's not different with Norse mythology. And also in Norse mythology, though, the stories are so wild sometimes that you can't help but think, you know, who were these people telling these stories? And mythology, largely these stories came to be by people really trying to explain the unexplainable for them at the time, not having the science and whatnot that we have today. And I just love to read the Norse myths in particular because I do think they are so wild, and to wonder who sat around a fire and decided that these are the gods and that these are the stories of the gods. And even you were talking about the Norse creation myth, and in there we have like the whole earth is basically made of like giants and celestial figures, and like the trees are, it's like all we're basically on a dead giant. I don't know. It's just wild the way that they put it together, and to sort of put yourself in that storytelling mode and think, like, how did this come to be? I think it's really a fun way to uh consider mythology. So we have like the power of Odin, but then we also have this, some of it is so ridiculous and silly. I don't know.
Yes, especially like the stories of Loki and all the things that he does and all the trouble that he gets into, and how Thor, and I think that's something that's funny too, because I love the Thor movies, all the Marvel movies, and they're so good. But in the myths, he's very much, just kind of a um I don't know, just a very stalwart person.
Mm.
He's strong, and he wants to defend things, but he often gets an idea, and then it's like really hard to turn him against that idea, and he thinks that it's a good path to go down. And so then Loki comes along, and at one point it's like, well, I see that Thor's not really, he's not really going the right way, or he's not really going to get what he wants going that way. So at one point, I want to help him and try to show him at the same time. But at the same time, Loki's like, but how can I make it so that I'm also making fun of him, and that he ends up in some kind of ridiculous situation? And so it's really funny how like you said, the stories came about, and how they are just, how Loki just comes in and just kind of turns everything on its end. But then, it turns out well, and they work together well. And so
Yeah.
that's fun.
Yeah, for sure. One of the other things I think about mythology that folks might not consider, as I sit here and think, who were these people who created these myths? Like, what had to be going through your mind? What foods, what kind of fungusy foods were you eating to produce those thoughts? I think is the question we should be asking. But anyway, uh, how we can do more than just read the stories, and we'll hear this idea of working with the energy of, and that can mean a lot of things, but I see it where people might think on a deity and then journal about that deity, or pull some cards, oracle cards or something that are aligned with either Greek goddesses or gods or what have you. And one of the things that when we look at Norse mythology, we do is embody and work with this energy through creating tangible experiences and items like the kinds that are mentioned in the story, or actually trying some of the practices. Like Odin is said to like sit and get quiet uh on burial grounds or at the base of a tree. And so we say, well, how can we do that same thing? Or creating a talisman with different objects from the different Norse myths. So you took our Norse mythology class, Viking Magic. We changed the name of it for this year. But did you create any of those or do any of those
Oh, yes.
exercises? Oh, yes.
Mhm. Oh, yes, I did it. It was so fun, and I still have, several of the little pieces, but it was just and one of the things that I really did was instead of going out and once I got, the list of, recommended kind of suggested things, to work with and to create, like Thor's hammer, instead of thinking, "Oh, well, I need to go to the craft store and buy da 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 da," I thought, "No, now what would Norse people have done in winter when they couldn't go outside and it was freezing cold outside and they had were the things that were in their house?" They would have created magic and made magic with the things that they had. And so that's what I did. And I went around and just found things in my house and put together my own. That was my favorite thing was putting Thor's hammer together. And so I found a few little pieces of bits and baubles around the house and put it together, and I still have it. And so it's a great thing to look at those things and to think that and to think, like you said, who were these people and what would they have done and how would they have created these things and created these magical things for themselves when it was winter and when they were inside or snowed in or everything was frozen. And so that was a big fun thing for me to do and to create things just out of the things that I already had, and that was very fun.
Could you imagine like Odin, Thor, Loki, like rolling up with Sleipnir to go to Michael's and get their we must forge a hammer. Off to Michael's.
Mhm. Yes, yes. When there is no Michaels. Mhm. Yeah,
That'd be
that was
funny.
funny.
Yeah.
Mhm.
Mm. Um, I yeah, I think that looking at story really too helps us see where we've been, where we are, and to pause. So much of our modern world is just like fast solutions. Go to the craft store and buy a tiny hammer or something, quick solutions. And I think that it removes us from our creativity, our resilience, our critical thinking, our ability to dream and imagine and then do something with that imagining also. Like you said, you're just going to hold back and look at what you have rather than going out to buy a solution. So I love working with mythology and just studying the myths for that same reason to slow myself and really enjoy the story and enjoy understanding where the story is coming from, why it might have been created, and to bring some more presence and awareness to myself through slowing down to enjoy those stories. Mm.
Yes, and that's definitely one of the things that doing the Norse magic class and looking at this time of year because it's always seemed to me so backwards the way we do it. We hit, September 1st and it's pumpkin spice all, everywhere and then, it's all getting ready for Halloween and making sure that everything's decorated and then having your house ready for Thanksgiving and having to cook and clean. And then, at Christmas, just shopping and trying to find presents for people and hosting parties and things in a time where it was really supposed to be, you're winding down. Those things are supposed to be where you're getting together in very cozy places and small spaces where you're sharing those things with each other and sitting around a fire and, not trying to, beat each other to the doors of Walmart to get whatever the Black Friday sales are. And so, it seemed like that we just, I just feel like that it's just so backwards now that we just are so frantic in this time of year that should be so much more inward. And that seems like what a lot of the myths tell us, is that, this is the way that nature is, and we see that these cycles and things that happen in nature, and this is a time, the summertime is when things grow and when we have to do those things, and grow and farm and raid and, whatever, for that, for what that community would have been doing. But then the winter is a time of when we sit and tell stories, and when we're inward, and when we save, and when we, um, plan for the next, abundant season. And so I've really tried to bring that into this time in my year, just in my family, by not being so frantic, and just saying, we're going to do this much for the holidays, and that's it. And, otherwise it just, we just spend more time together. And especially because then, like, after Christmas, the day after Christmas, everything's done. And
Yeah.
but it's still a long time before it's going to get warm again. And so what do you do? And you've just spent all this energy for these things that, are just done the day after. And so to really step into that energy and say, well, this is a whole season. This is a whole season of slowing down and being quiet and sharing stories and becoming inward. And so, especially in, like, after the winter solstice, and, taking that seasonal energy through that whole time, and making it into a special time, and not just like, oh, waiting for spring again, which is part of it, but it's part of, being present in that time as well.
Mm. I'm curious, as you say all of this, I think this is a great opportunity for us to speak to the different kinds of people and stages of life who are listening, because I was just thinking of one of the questions we get is always, well, what books do you recommend? And Anna and I bet you can agree, Kelly. Kelly was she homeschooled her kids through high school. Mine are still little, so I'm beginning. People ask me about homeschooling. I'm like, mine are 6 and 9. It's real low stakes right now.
Yeah.
The stakes are low. I don't worry too much about it at this stage. Like, we're reading, we're writing, we're doing the math. That's about where I worry about it. But when you have young ones in your life, I think, like, I mean, obviously, just with my interests, the things we do here at Sisters Enchanted, I read myths and think about them in all different ways than, like, I look at them too from a personal development standpoint. Like, if I need courage, who's a deity that I can call upon for courage?
Yes, a deity that you can definitely call upon for courage. And that's a good way to, really look at it. And I did, like Sarah said, I homeschooled my kids through graduation, and they all love different myths, and they all love, the stories, and which I did too. And I grew up with those, which surprisingly I did, because I came from a more Christian, background, but I still grew up with all of the stories, the Greek myths. My parents were very into, getting us books, and going to the library, and I love to read. So I read and loved the stories back then, and my kids do too. They all love different ones. But they're great stories, and they're great ways to teach. And there were lots of times that we did homeschool lessons, or did parts of, their curriculum through myths, because they told different stories, and I could relate things. And they are like, okay, we'll read this myth, and then we're going to talk about it. And they're like, okay, but if I said, read this book, they would say, oh. So, it was a great way to bring it in. So I think that any stage of life, it's a great way to bring it into your life for lots of different reasons.
Yeah. Thank you, Kelly, for finishing my thought there. I had a
You're
coughing
welcome.
fit. If anybody's watching this on YouTube, you just saw me hack my brains out. Um, I'm getting over an illness, and it just comes, and I can't stop. Anyway, yeah, Kelly, that's why, like, children's books about the myths are great, uh, and there's all different versions, and I love going to, like, a used bookstore and just picking up whatever they have, um, and two, so, like, when you have young ones, you can read the stories, but now that your kids are grown and you still found value in use it in the stories and the myths and, like, power and creating your hammer and these different talismans. So I think that one of the themes we talked about this last weekend in our Halloween event was the disconnection from who you were to who you are, and the disconnection between, where we might pin down grief and then we lose our joy along the way and whatnot, and tapping back into story through mythology is, I think, a beautiful way to bring out some of that childlike energy, and particularly for people who feel like at the holidays they do for everybody and nobody does for them, to, like, ignite some of that wonder within yourself by reading myths and stories and lighting a candle and having a cozy, I don't know, a mug of something that makes you feel cozy, your favorite mug, and, like, just reading these myths, I think, is a great way to serve yourself during this time of year that really gets away from us also.
Yes, because if you definitely don't do it for yourself, and if you definitely, especially, I know having husband and three kids, and the holidays come around, and I was always the one who did it and did all of it, and I did, I loved it, and I loved doing holidays and things with the kids, but if I sat back and waited and said, well, they need to recognize all the things that I'm doing for them, and that I spent the last 2 weeks wrapping presents and whatever, but just kind of coming to that and saying, okay, well, what can I do for myself, and having that time. And I think that's one of the things that I'm doing now, is just saying, I did that and I enjoyed it and it was fun, but how can I do it now and not rely on that, and not say, because for me, it's like, well, I don't have that anymore. And so, how is it going to be meaningful if I don't have kids to do Christmas with, or if I don't have kids to take trick or treating? And so
Mhm.
that for me is coming and saying, okay, well, what are things that I used to do before that, and how can I come back to that? And that's one of the things, just sitting down, like you said, sitting down with the mess, sitting down with a book, and a cup of tea, and just taking that time and reading it and enjoying it, and it be a just something that is fun, and something that is just nourishing to my soul, and it doesn't have to mean anything to anybody else.
Yeah, I love that. It doesn't have to mean anything to anybody else. That should be like a quote on a wall. Just for you. Well, if you are a person listening to this, go get yourself some books. Any mythology books will do. Neil Gaiman, one of my favorite authors, has a great Norse mythology book. But if you just go to the kids section of a used bookstore or any books or library, you're going to find tons and tons of myths to read up on. And just head in there and grab some. If you want to join us on a mythology adventure, Kelly is hosting our Norse mythology class, which is starting uh, in a couple weeks after this, but we do have registration open. And this is a formerly called our Viking magic class, and Kelly is teaching it as Norse mythology this year. And Anna is touching in with some Greek myth too that we're adding to the cauldron of conversation. You're going to hear about loads of other deity, including Poseidon, Medusa, Dionysus, Hermes, Zeus. It's going to be a really fun time, I think, in weaving in some of this Greek myth with the Norse myths that Kelly's going to take the lead on, and just guide everyone through conversation around the myths during this busy time of year where it is really easy to sort of lose yourself in serving everybody else and getting swept up in the chaos and not pausing to just be and have some of that wonder within yourself. Kelly, anything you want to add about the class before
Yeah.
we sign off today?
It's going to be very much a time for you to just really come inside. And it's going to be, this nice, warm place, this cauldron that we're all going to kind of gather around and just imagine, our favorite whatever, bubbling in the cauldron. And we'll come around and talk about the Norse myths that you've learned about, some of the stories behind them, a lot of the symbolism, so that we can bring that, because a lot of the symbols that were very sacred to the Norse people are things that we can identify with today. We can bring into our lives today. So we're just going to sit, pause, breathe, talk about the stories. It'd be just a very good, open, welcoming space, and make our little hammers.
I'm excited for that part. Everybody wants a little Thor's hammer, a little Mjolnir to sit on their desk or something. There's this store. I live in Connecticut, and there's a store in Mystic, Connecticut, towards Rhode Island, and it's a like Norwegian, Scandinavian themed store, and they have a big, like, human-sized Mjolnir out front. Yeah, it's giant.
That's
You can
great.
stand
I
next to
love
it,
it.
take your photo. Yeah, it's pretty cool. Anyway, we're not making one that big unless you're wild and want to do that.
Yes.
Then have at it. All right, y'all. Well, maybe you'll join us in there. If not, read your myths. It's a great time of year to do so. And thank you, Kelly, for coming on and chatting mythology with me. I appreciate it.
Oh, you're so welcome. It was very fun.
Yeah.
Come,
All
Norse magic. Join us. It'll
Yes,
be fun.
come hang out. Kelly, everyone's loving all the things you're doing, Kelly. We're so appreciative of you this year and so glad to have you teaching here.
Well,
Yeah.
it's been a blast, and I just enjoy it every day. So it's fun.
Well, thank you, thank you, thank you. And thank you for being here. And thank you, everybody, for listening. Make sure to subscribe so you don't miss episodes in the future, because we've always got 2 new episodes coming out a week for you right now of the Expedition to Soul podcast. We've got Norse magic starting soon. In about what's in the future, what date is it? I don't know. About 6 weeks, we'll have our Yule Stay Magic magazine dropping, which is free. So look forward to that. And also, if you're not quite able to join us for Norse Magic this year, just be sure to check into our weekly emails, the blog, all the good stuff that we always have going out. But we'd love to have you in that mythology class if that's something that's fitting in for you this year. All right. Thanks again, Kelly. Thanks to everybody listening. And until next time, we hope that you have an enchanted rest of your day ahead.
If you liked this episode of the Expedition to Soul podcast, please rate, review, subscribe. If you're listening on Apple Podcasts, it will really help us spread everyday magic, intention, and intuition to the masses, and helps us so much as a small business. Be sure to hit that subscribe button on your favorite podcasting platform so you never miss an episode. There are new episodes every Tuesday. And as always, thank you so much for listening and being part of the community here at the Sisters Enchanted. And we'll see you in the next episode.